So welcome everyone to Phillips Mill Art Talk. I'm your host, Laura Womack, and with me is our producer, Jen McHugh.
Hello all.
Today we're delighted to have with us Dr. Laura Turner Igoe, Chief Curator of the Michener Art Museum. She's worked at some other impressive institutions as well, including Harvard Art Museum, Princeton University Art Museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and her research has been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Smithsonian American Art Museum, among many others. She's a specialist in American art, which is perfect because we've asked her here today to talk about some prominent artists who started the vibrant art colony in Bucks County that continues to this day. I know we're all aware of some of the greats like Redfield and Garber, and they are truly gifted artists. But there were so many extraordinary artists, even in those early days, that we're excited to talk about some of the other artists who contributed to Phillips Mill's and our area's reputation for excellent art. Dr. Laura Igoe, welcome to Phillips Mill Art Talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura and Jen, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I see some familiar names in the participant list, so I'm glad you all could join, even on this beautiful pollen-filled day.
That's right. We're competing with a gorgeous day, but it's exciting to have you here, Laura. And I know you've prepared I was excited to look over the slides that you prepared for us. And so I think let's jump right into it. We like to look at as much artwork as we possibly can. So
that's great, because as you know, I did bring many slides, so
yes,
there's lots to see. Yeah, so this is the exhibition list for the first Phillips Mill exhibition in 1929, and we use this as I'm using this as a jumping off point when we were preparing for the talk today. Jen was very helpfully kind of sharing some documents, including this one, and it's just so fun to see, you know, who was exhibiting early on, you know, the first exhibition at the mill. And some names you'll recognize, some names you might not. There's several names that were new to me, and some that I really can't even find very much information on. So to me, it's almost like this list could be a good master's thesis or dissertation project for somebody to kind of track down, you know, who all these people were, where are all these artworks. Some of them we do know, we know where they are and what they are, but others we don't. So it's anyway, it was fun to kind of to use this as an inspiration to putting together my PowerPoint today to talk about the many different styles and artists that were working and exhibiting in the area.
And just for if people want to reference it, Jen did put it in social media, so it's on Facebook and in Instagram if people want to take a closer look at it.
And does everybody here sort of know, do you think the history of the mill? Perhaps not, but maybe. I guess I can give some background too. So yeah, so as many of you know, I imagine, so the mill is really where it became the epicenter of Pennsylvania Impressionism in the early 20th century. So George Marshall, as a doctor, was working in Philadelphia, ended up moving up to New Hope and purchasing the mill. And his childhood friend from Ohio, William Lathrop, came to visit him and decided to stay. And Lathrop really drew a lot of other artists to the mill who took up residence there or moved to the area, to the New Hope area, to paint, and they socialized around the mill. That became kind of the center. And as Marshall, you know, was becoming older, he was thinking about how to preserve that space as an important artistic cultural center. And he worked with artists in the area to help preserve that space for the future. So people like Lathrop was very much involved, of course. Ralph Bowen, there's Baums, there's Bowens, lots of similar names in the area. Ralph Bowen, who was Lathrop's son-in-law and architect, was very much involved in that initial effort. And so was William F. Taylor, another artist. Both of them helped raise funds to purchase the mill, and Lathrop became the first president of the Community Association. And so they, acquired the mill by purchase. They preserved and maintained the mill as a historic landmark. and also made sure it became, remained an important center of the community. So not only a place where art exhibitions were held and continue to be held, but there were also theatrical productions and pageants that were put on by its members, and also a space for dances, for musicals, for lectures, speeches, debates. Really, just it became. It was even prior, but the community association really kept it as this important cultural center.
And we're on our 92nd art show this year. We're working on putting it together. So it's really an extraordinary achievement that what they got going, and that is continuing today.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's look at some art.
Yeah, can we bring the slides back? Yeah, so Lathrop is really seen as one of, with Redfield, I would say one of the fathers of the New Hope school of Impressionist painting. And so here are two paintings by him. These are from sort of later on in his career, 1920s and 30s. So around the time the first Mill exhibition was up, and Lathrop, of course, exhibited work at that first exhibition and continued to throughout the rest of his life. But just to give you a sense of his style and his type of painting, which, many would classify as Impressionist, but it's also inspired by tonalism, another, important American style of painting at the time that emphasized atmospheric effects. It's much more sort of smoothly painted than if you think of Redfield, who has these very choppy animated brushstrokes. Lathrop is also known for painting early morning, late in the evening, he really captures this essence of fading or gathering light. And I think you can see that with Chilmark Moor, Martha's Vineyard, and also the bonfire, which I imagine that you don't see a bonfire, of course, but it's really, I think the way he's describing the sunset or sunrise, actually, because we don't really know what exactly early morning or late in the day.
Laura, I actually got to see this at the Freeman's auction last year. It was one of my few COVID outings. I drove down by myself, made an appointment,
great,
and had it myself. And there actually is, you can't see it.
Oh, you can see the bonfire. Okay, it is. Isn't it in the dune here?
That's right.
Right.
A little bit of orange spot, and it's a beautiful painting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It did very well at that auction. So
yes, it did.
Yeah.
Fantasies flew right by.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
And also John Fallinsby was he and his wife Ruth were both very important early members, and really also founders as well of the community association, very involved with the establishment of that group. And these are actually the two works that Fallinsby exhibited in that first exhibition in 1929. Thank goodness for the John Fallinsby catalog raisonné, which has done an excellent job of tracking the provenance of his paintings, and so I went there just to see if I could find some of the works based on the titles, and it came up that you can even click on a link that says 1929 Phillips Mill exhibition, and you'll see all of the works that he exhibited in that exhibition. So that's pretty great. So we have Shad Fisherman on the right, and this portrait of Steve Schrang on the left, who I don't actually know who that is, but maybe somebody else, I don't know if someone in the chat knows who that is, if that's an artist or other local figure. But in 1926, Fallinsby really changed his style, and it became, he painted in this much more expressive way, and you can especially see that in Shad Fisherman, this like sort of expressive brushstroke. And his palette, which had been almost more pastel at an earlier time period, became much darker, a little moodier. And this is because he had spent some time abroad at that time and had seen work by like Cezanne and some other more modernist painters abroad, and I think had adopted some of their color palettes and also some of their ways of painting as well. So his style was really kind of shifting around this point.
That Shad Fest is the Shad Fisherman is an incredible painting. I mean, it's just so full of energy. I understand that by the mid 20th century, the Pennsylvania Academy was no longer accepting his works for exhibit, which I think that's ironic because as you and I were discussing, a Daniel Garber retrospective at the Academy in the 90s helped remind people of the extraordinary talents of these early painters. And so it's just interesting to see how the fashions change and people come and go.
And the styles change too. So like I said, Fallinsby was painting very differently just a few years prior to this. And I think, styles too at the Academy sort of were shifting around that time too. I think there was, Garber and the Impressionists were still finding place to exhibit there, but other artists that might have been painting a little bit more modern or pushing, the boundaries of realism and abstraction were perhaps struggling to find a home there.
Right. Let's take a look at the next one, Jen.
And this is a painting and art collection that I believe is one that was exhibited again in the first Phillips Mill exhibition in 1929. So this is Brook and Winter by Kenneth Nunemaker from 1926. And it's in the Lenfest collection. So you might have recently seen it on view at our Lenfest collection exhibition, Impressionism to Modernism. Quite a large work, actually. And Nunemaker was good friends with Redfield, and I think you can tell by this painting. This is to me is a very Redfield-esque painting. It's even not only the brushstrokes, which you can see very clearly in the water, especially, and then in the delineation of the trees and the grasses, but also this perspective of like being in a creek or a stream, looking up, is one that Redfield paints kind of again and again too. So very similar that way. But there is a Brook and Winter that was in the 1929 exhibition, and I think it's highly likely that it was this painting. So another kind of painting from the exhibition.
It's so exciting to see the actual paintings that were there. I know that was hard to do, Laura, so appreciate you.
Oh yeah, I wish I could have done more because it's a great rabbit hole to go down, but I didn't have the time to track down all the works, and I'm sure a lot are in private collections still. I mean, that's the thing about New Hope artists is, of course, the Michener has quite a few important works, but there are a number that are still in private collections and descendants of the artist collection, for example. So they're not all easily searchable online. It takes some more digging to do. That's why I'm so thankful for the scholars who study art, like John Fallinsby, which Jen McHugh just posted the site for the catalog raisonné, that it's so wonderful when you find that. Garber has a catalog raisonné and Fallinsby does. And that very well might be it in terms of completed catalog raisonnés. I know Redfield is an ongoing project. So yeah, it's a good resource to have if you can find it for an artist.
That's great. Thanks for that, Jen. Let's look at the next slide, please.
And Slo Brayden was another important early member of the Community Association, and I haven't been able to track down his exact works, although it seems like he exhibited, based on the list, a number of portraits, which this of course is not. Besides his landscape paintings, he was really known for these really beautiful portraits he painted of young women in his family. So there's a number of those, especially in private collections still. But this is our only Brayden actually at the Michener Art Museum, called After the Rain. And you can get a really good sense of his appreciation for color, and especially his greens. He really he loved painting with green, and he really was able to kind of capture the sense of this lush foliage and trees and landscape along the canal. It's like almost like a kaleidoscope of different greens within this one painting.
Gorgeous painting.
Mm-hmm. And so really the slides that we're going through now are the Impressionists that we're exhibiting in the 1929 exhibition. But as we'll see a little bit later on, they were not the only kind of group of artists exhibiting, and we'll see some different styles too.
It's nice to have a field, Laura.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think this is what we think of, right? When we think of the New Hope School of Painting, Phillips Mill in its early years, as we think of like Lathrop and Brayden and Fallinsby, even though Fallinsby kind of toes the line a little bit between Impressionism and Modernism, and also Henry Snell. Excuse me. I'm getting that pollen throat too, I think, a little bit. But Snell was good friends with Lathrop, and they actually met working at the photo engraving company in New York. That was actually how a lot of artists around this time would get their start, as they would work for engraving companies. They would produce prints for commercial usage. And both Lathrop and Snell got their start that way. So Snell would visit Lathrop when he was living at Phillips Mill, and finally moved to New Hope in 1925. And Snell, kind of like Garber, for example, was also an important teacher at the time. So he taught at the Philadelphia School of Design for Women, which is now Moore College of Art and Design. Excuse me. And he taught several painters who would become members of the women's artist group called the Philadelphia 10. And some of them also were exhibiting at in the early Phillips Mill exhibitions too. So these are, excuse me, two paintings that are by Snell in our collection. The Seagull's Haunts, which is on the left, is from the coast of, is from St. Ives on the coast of Cornwall in England. So Snell was British, and he frequently returned to St. Ives to paint, especially in the summer months. So that's one of those works on the left. And on the right is Barbershop, which is painted from his apartment in New Hope, looking down at the street below. So it kind of shows, a more sort of lively town scene. So two great works from our collection.
Yeah, it's a very unusual perspective, the barbershop, isn't it? It has all of this empty space in the lower right quadrant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is interesting. Are you, Jen, how do you say you might recognize the view in the barbershop? Do you have some insights to share? Or just in general from Mechanic Street?
No, it is, I believe, it's here. Sorry, I have too many windows open. It is, my understanding is that it is from the Starbucks, that building, the old bank building. And if you look down, and then if you look at it, you can see the church, which is now Marsha Brown's, and the white building and everything. So yes. Oh, Robert Beck just said from above Starbucks. See? So I must be right. He just confirmed it for me. Thanks, Robert.
And Jen.
And there's a great story too of how that work came into our collection. So it's from a group of works that were given to us by Dr. Kenneth Libby. I hope I'm getting that name correct. But a local doctor who worked, he treated many of the artists in the Impressionist school, or many New Hope artists, and some of them would pay him in paintings. But actually the barbershop was given to Libby by Snell's wife soon after he passed away, as like a final sort of thank you gift. So yes. Oh, then the white building was Kenneth Libby's home. That's right. Which is the building that's kind of in the background. Sorry, my Zoom screen. Right there, exactly. I've got all your faces, Laura and Jen, instead of the white building.
Well, this is a great.
So it's a little intimate view.
Yeah, a great community conversation with Ellen Antonison helping locate it, and Pam Sergi, who's on the art committee, saying in the Mansion Inn. So that's wonderful. Thank you all for that.
Right. I'm relatively sort of new to Bucks County and the area. Well, at least in terms of, I don't live there, but I of course work at the Michener, so I'm still learning about all the landmarks. So it's good to get feedback about that.
And it's nice to see that some of New Hope is as it's changing so quickly. Okay, I think we've got George Sautter up next.
Right, who's, I know, a favorite of many, Sautter. And he also was exhibiting in the 1929 exhibition. And he is really known, I think, as many of you know, for his moonlit scenes, which became a big part of his body of work. And Mid-January is just an excellent example of that. And I was recently, we had a very small class at the Michener that was looking at Pennsylvania Impressionism. We called it our Curators class. It was really fun for me because I got to talk about art with people for the first time in like a year. So because we had a small group, of course, masked and socially distant in the galleries, and we were looking at this painting in particular. And it's a wonderful painting just to spend time with and look at very closely, because you can see, you know, the more you look at it, you see the shadows of the tree in the right corner, kind of stretching towards the house, and the footprints in the snow, the little footprints leading up to the door of the house. And, you know, Sotter's stone buildings and homes always look very inviting, right? Like you can walk right in and cozy up by the fire. They have that real sort of welcoming quality to them. But it's just, you know, he was beloved for these paintings. And even, you know, this was painted in 1940, so this is one of his more later works, but he was painting this way until the 1940s and 50s, and even writing at the time that, you know, he wasn't getting selected for juried exhibitions as much anymore, and he wasn't being written about in the press, but like they were selling, so he was going to keep making them. And I think, Laura, you mentioned that he was consistently awarded what is best of show, essentially.
The favorite. I read,
yeah.
read it from the minutes that he was just a little embarrassed by consistently being the crowd favorite.
I think it's just, his work is just so appealing, right? And I think also has a real sense of place. Like you can look at this and say, well, this is Bucks County, right? Like this, it just looks familiar and sort of, and homey, and yeah, there's a kind of a dash of nostalgia about it too. Like you're almost looking back in time.
Very comforting. You know, Laura, you said the other day how comforting these paintings are. And this is a time where we really do need that comfort. So, yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And this is on, like I said, this is on view in our galleries too. So if you come over to the Michener, it's in our main gallery, our Putnam Smith gallery, where our Pennsylvania Impressionist paintings are up.
Absolutely worthwhile.
And yeah, so I have these two paintings by William Francis and Mary Perkins Taylor, who I mentioned in the beginning. William Francis Taylor was instrumental in raising funds to purchase the mill for the Community Association. Both of them exhibited in the first exhibition and were, you know, very active, involved artists. Some of you might know they also ran the Hard Times Tavern in Lumberville, Pennsylvania, so they were innkeepers as well. And both painted in this Impressionist style, although I find this work by William Francis Taylor in our collection, George Washington crossing the Delaware, to be really, you know, it's of course in this Impressionist style, but the way that he's using color, especially in the water, is very, has a sort of a modernist sensibility about it. He wrote that, you know, of course, Washington crossing the Delaware has been painted many times, but he didn't think it was realistic enough. So he painted the scene as it might have seemed to those, this is a quote from him, quote, it might well have seemed to those present on that nasty, sleety night, end quote. So here you can barely, I mean, you can imagine that one central figure is George Washington, but you can kind of barely make him out. He's not the heroic figure that we've seen in other representations of that event. Yeah, and then Taylor actually later became the founding president of the Delaware Valley Protective Association, which was pivotal in preserving the Delaware Canal. So
it's another beautiful, I think it's very effective to have George Washington, we're assuming George Washington outlined like that. And I think, absolutely one of the striking things about this painting is the blues and the greens together in that water. It's really unusual. And it takes us over to the Mary Perkins Taylor's painting, which also has this gorgeous yellow in the remaining foliage.
Right, yeah. And just like in that, and in her painting, you can get a sense of like the snow sort of melting and turning over to spring, as you can see the green kind of peeking through. And then there's this figure, it's hard to see sort of, but there's a figure coming up the path on like a horse that horse to me is very strange. Like it's a very tall, kind of like skinny horse, almost like it has an otherworldly quality about it, which I'm not sure is intentional, but anyway, that's just was my impression when I first saw this painting.
I just was so charmed by the chartreuse color that I didn't even notice the horse.
Oh yeah, the horse sort of fades into the background in a way. Yeah.
All right, Jen,
We actually have a question from Patrick Fowles. He wanted to know where is the previous building, and I think he was referring to the Sautter. Mid-January.
Oh, this building. I don't know. I don't know exactly if anybody has seen that building before.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure. I think someday someone needs to do like a driving tour of Pennsylvania Impressionists paintings just to locate where all of them were painted, because I'm sure some of them are very easily identifiable, and some might be a combination of things too. I mean, it's possible that Sautter took this one building and added those other buildings behind it, and changed some things around. It's not, the artists were creative in terms of how they would compose a landscape, and it wasn't always strictly from life.
I love that. That's a great challenge, Laura. We're going to take it up and see.
Take it up, yeah.
Some of these buildings, and maybe
some people have. I've spoken with collectors and other Pennsylvania Impressionist enthusiasts who have told me where things are very clearly, like they've driven there and they've found it, and it's the place. So I'm sure a lot of that work has been done. We just have to compile it all, put it together.
Let's do it, Laura.
Sounds good.
And Jen probably knows where half of them are already anyway.
Yeah, Jen probably does know quite a bit.
Okay, what's up next, Jen?
And I included this work by R.C. McGill because he was the mayor of New Hope at the time and also an artist. And I just love that little tidbit. It's, only in New Hope, right, would the mayor also be exhibiting work in the first Phillips Mill Community Association exhibition. It's just like perfect, and again, it's just a lovely sort of scene of what it says there of Lower New Hope with the this really energetic brushstroke throughout. So I just had to put that in there.
I think that's great. You're right about the mayor, and I think this scene I don't think looks the same. I think I know where that bridge is, just south of the main intersection.
Yeah, it's a lot has changed, while some has remained the same. Sometimes when I drive around down by the river on River Road, for example, I feel like I've driven by a building that Vern Coppage painted, for example. It's some of it seems like it hasn't developed too much, but then New Hope, of course, though, has changed quite a bit, I think, from its early days.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right, and then I was interested to see in the early exhibition list that Charles Frederick Ramsey exhibited many works. All of them it's called decoration, which I'm curious about and what that means. But I'm showing you some examples of Ramsey's work from a very early stage, so at 1911, and then later on in 1934, just you can get a great, it's sort of like a bit of whiplash to see how much his style changes in that amount of time. In 1911, he was actually sharing a home and studio, so it's called Huffnoggle Mansion, with Robert Spencer, another important Pennsylvania Impressionist artist. And he painted quite a few of these vertical Impressionist style works, much like Autumn Afternoon, in this really soft palette. But I think even in these early works, you can kind of see how his style is a little different than the Pennsylvania Impressionists we're used to. There's something very kind of simplified in the way that he's painting the trees, for example. You could tell that he's seen Cezanne and is kind of thinking about him as well. And if you actually go to the next slide, Jen, oh, there you go. And here's actually the next one. Let's go to the next one. We can come back to this one. We're going to jump around a little bit. And also Fernand Léger. So he's thinking too about futurism with a work like The Modern Woman. And Ramsey was very much interested in sort of the nude female figure. But of course, at this point in the 30s, it's getting very abstract and broken down into these different geometric shapes. Again, like he's like very much thinking of Léger in the way that Léger is breaking down form into these very flat planes. Someone's chiming in with where the George Sautter painting is. See, I knew someone would know. Perfect.
I'll put that on the tour.
Yeah, I know. So so again, at the point when the Phillips Mill Community Association exhibition would have been on, this is the way that Ramsey would have been painting. So the works like this would have been on view, even though he was calling them decoration at the time, so they might not have been as figural. But still, like very like thinking about this with a Sautter is interesting to imagine. Yeah. Very, very different. And he actually also founded one of the first modern art galleries in New Hope, which is called the Blue Mask Gallery. And so Ramsey became one of the leading modernists in the area at the time.
So it just is like looking at the first slide that we saw with his more impressionist take, and then this with The Modern Woman. I mean, you would never guess it's the same artist. No, you really wouldn't. And he's not the only artist that makes that switch. And Jen, if you want to keep going, we could get to Charles Rosen, who's another kind of well-known art. So hold on, let's do this slide real quick. So this, I like this comparison, and it's the comparison that opened Impressionism to Modernism, the Lenfest collection exhibition, because, these two paintings were painted like at the same time. I mean, Garber's Stockton Steeple is actually 2 years later than Ramsey's Modern Woman. I like them together because of the verticality, right, of the steeple and then of the woman itself. There's something very architectural about Ramsey's work as well. But it's just like, it's kind of amazing to think that these two artists are living and working and exhibiting in the same area, but like just very, very different approaches to their work and to their styles. And it just shows that even though we think of New Hope as this impressionist haven, there were still artists like Ramsey that were doing something, incredibly different, and had just a very different perspective on their work and their painting. And these were all friends.
Yeah, similar colors. Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. And a lot of them, they played poker together. They socialized together. They discussed art together, and they exhibited together. So Garber actually didn't exhibit in the first inaugural exhibition at Phillips Mill, but he did exhibit work later on. And Ramsey actually, I think, only exhibited in the first exhibition and did not exhibit at Phillips Mill after that, at least not that I've seen. Jen, I don't know if you saw any, if you know otherwise, but at least my quick perusal of the exhibition catalogs show that he was not exhibiting after 1929.
Well, maybe that gets to the famous Rift, which I think is coming up.
Yeah. And I think the next slide is Rosen. Yeah, so Charles Rosen is another artist that paints initially in this, almost prismatic impressionist style, as you can see from Water Birches on the left. And then, right around this time, so circa 1918, he makes a switch sort of similar to what Ramsey did, in that his palette totally changes. It becomes darker. He's more interested in, urban scenes, more kind of industrial scenes. This is under a bridge on the Delaware River. So he's looking at the backs of houses and tenements that line up against the river here. And pretty soon after painting this work, he leaves New Hope entirely and moves to Woodstock, New York, where he teaches with the Art Students League there. So he kind of removes himself entirely from the community. But a total switch in style, I mean, just completely different.
And he turned on a dime, didn't he, Laura? I mean, he just woke up one morning and said, I'm unhappy with these landscapes.
He famously told, I believe he told Fallinsby, I'm never painting another work like that again, essentially for one to his last Impressionist painting. So he did make that switch very clearly.
Right. Let's see. I'm seeing in the Q&A that Judy would like to know why. I'm not quite sure what that refers to.
Why he made the switch?
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
Well, he started. Yeah. So he started. I mean, a lot of it was for, you know, both for Rosen and Ramsey, is this new interest in. I love it. I love how everyone. I'm sorry, just commenting at the. Everyone always knows where these things are. It's just great. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So at this moment, you know, in the 19 teens into the 1920s is really when European modernism is becoming more well known and acknowledged and exhibited in the United States. And so these artists are seeing new things, like I said, by Cezanne, by Leger, by other artists, modernist artists that are working more abstractly, Kandinsky, for example, later on. And so they're seeing new things and they're learning new things in the academies, and they're bringing that into their work too. It's, you know, it's people kind of change with the times, and that's what happened to some of these artists as well.
So Laura, I don't know if you can help me with this. I was struggling a little bit. I was reading about Rosen and his concept of form relationship and how we respond to that on maybe a different level than the aesthetic emotion of these landscapes. And maybe that's part of why he made the transition. Just, I don't know if you can write on that, or.
So he's thinking, I think, in terms of like, what is the underlying structure of a landscape? And I think that's coming through in Under the Bridge, for example. And that's something that that artists like Cezanne were interested too. Like, what is the structure? How do we kind of break it down to its essential elements? And I think that's what's happening with Rosen and Under the Bridge as well, and some of his later works too.
All right, so we've got Judith talking about, this is the bridge over Ingham Creek near the railroad track in New Hope, where she used to live near. And Pam.
New Hope. Yeah. I think I did know that, actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that information's in the chat for folks. Thank you, ladies, for that.
See, all we need to do to like document all the locations of these paintings is just we'll just like save the chat and we'll be good to go. This is Mechanic Street. I know that.
Very good.
Yeah, by Lloyd Nye, and we have this work by Nye included because this is Nye is seen as really the start of what's known as the split between the Impressionists and the Modernists in New Hope. So in 1930, reportedly, William Lathrop, the Mills, of course, the Community Association's president, rejected a painting of the New Hope Canal by Nye, reportedly due to its inclusion of a bright red bridge. That painting is no longer extant, or we don't know where it is or what it was, but I imagine it was probably colored very similarly, or had a similar palette to Mechanic Street, New Hope, that's in our collection. And you can see sort of the brightly colored buildings that Nye has in his work. But I love this orange, sort of orangey yellow one, for example, on the right. And in reaction, Nye's friend Ramsey, who we've already seen, so Charles Ramsey, founded the New Group, which opened its first exhibition on May 16th, 1930, one day before a Phillips Mill exhibition opened. And one national publication reported that, quote, "The conservatives and the radicals were holding rival exhibitions in one of the country's most famous art colonies." So it was making national news even that these two groups were setting up different exhibition venues. And so by 1932, the New Group was supplanted by, or I guess became essentially the Independents, which is a loosely organized group of modernists that included Faye Swengel Badura, Henry Baker, Ralston Crawford, Charles Evans, Rad Miller, Lloyd Nye, and Ramsey. So this is kind of seen very much in myth as like the time when these two groups split. But I think it's much more much muddier than that. It's not this clean separation that I think we read about or have heard about in the past, because even after that split, modernist artists continued to exhibit at Phillips Mill, and the Independents actually hosted exhibitions of Pennsylvania Impressionists at their exhibition venues. So Nye, after his, work with the Two Red Bridge on the canal was rejected, still exhibited another work called Cow in that 1930 exhibition at Phillips Mill, so still exhibiting. And in 1932, Nye, Ralston Crawford, Fay Swengel, and others, including Rad Miller, continually exhibited at Phillips Mill, but those artists also exhibited at Phillips Mill. Ramsey, as far as I could tell, as I mentioned before, never did exhibit at Phillips Mill after the first exhibition. So he might be the exception.
So Nye also won top prize in the Phillips Mill Art Show in 1960. So, I mean, how do we judge this story? I mean, it makes good newspaper copy. Is it apocryphal? Is there, has the drama accreted over time? Or was it true? Was it just this big, massive split in New Hope?
I don't think it was a massive split. I think it was much more nuanced and complicated than that. I think probably the modernist artists might have wanted to promote it as a split, just in order to, the game press to be able to establish sort of an identity for themselves. So that was worthwhile, I think, on their part. They were also, but like I said, they were, many of them were friends with some of the Impressionist painters. They socialized together. They still exhibited together. And I think they probably still saw the Phillips Mill annual, twice a year exhibition as another venue to show their work, right? Another place to get attention and to sell and to promote themselves. So they took advantage of what they could get, I think, too.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. But I think, and I have a quote too of by John Fallinsby, who reviewed the Independents' first exhibition in 1933, where he said, quote, "The painters dare to blaze a new trail or widen an old one. If these trails be those by which people are destined to travel, the effort expended is well worthwhile," end quote. So to me, that's like a begrudging review. He's like, well, if this is where things are heading, then why not?
Yes, we have to go there.
Yeah, but it's a good sort of instance where, like he was the chair of Fallinsby was the chair of the 1930 Phillips Mill selection jury that rejected Nye's painting. So he was involved with that, but still supportive of their project and their style and where they were headed. So that says something, I think, about the relationship between these two groups.
Absolutely.
And I put this in there because I was thinking, about Nye and Mechanic Street and why perhaps a bright red bridge would be too much for the selection committee. But then I was thinking too about Coppage and her use of color, which was very, unorthodox, very bright, and wondering, I don't think Coppage ever ruffled any feathers at the community association. So it's, I don't know, it's just interesting to think about these two artists together and the way they use color. And Coppage herself, I think, sometimes painted very abstractly. So just a very different, very, very similar approach in some ways, but very different reception.
Well, I think from the little I've read about Nye, also I think there's some personality maybe that's happening there as well. I don't know. That's speculation on my part.
It's a possibility. Even though Nye kept exhibiting, so.
Exactly.
And just some more work by Nye from around that time period, just to give you a sense of his use of color and his compositions as well.
And
he does like red.
Yes. And Rad Miller, another artist who continually exhibited at the mill and was a fixture there. But again, his use of color was also, very different than some of the Impressionist painters, very bright palette, not always true to life. So it's a good, yeah, I just included this too to kind of show that as well.
Yeah, and this lace factory is very famous.
Extremely famous. I think it's famous locally, at least. It's well known in our collection. It's a favorite work as well. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's nice also to see New Hope Mills, because he painted something else too. So
yeah, he's great. And he didn't shy away from industrial scenes, which a lot of painters just didn't include the industry along the river. But Miller took it as his main subject matter quite often. And Lace Factory is a good example of that, even though I guess you do see the smoke in the smokestack of New Hope Mills, but there is, like Lace Factory, there's no sort of sense of I don't know, pollution or any sort of activity. It's almost like, I actually wonder if someone commissioned that work from him, because it's just so centrally located there across the river in between the trees,
right,
with its lovely fall foliage in the background.
Right. Okay, next slide, please, Jen. And then I'm going, got to see this. And then we've got a question.
Hold on for 1 second. My daughter is snuck into the room. Bye, Brooke. Sorry. My husband's like in the background, be like, I don't know where you are, Brooke. You better get here.
It's Sunday afternoon.
He was very quiet, so
he's doing great.
He's putting up with it. Yeah, I'm including these two. I included these two paintings by modernist artists. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. One that I particularly love is Karam Stonev. So this is the cooperative painting group. I gotta grab my notes real quick. I think, no, I don't have a quote. But so this is the cooperative painting project, which was started by several of the modernists that I've already mentioned. So Ramsey, but then also Louis Stone. There's a great painting there's a great abstraction by Louis Stone on the right, and Charles Evans, and they would get together. And taking cues from the improvisational style of jazz, they would paint by consensus. So they would agree on the composition at each stage in its development, including its completion. And it was always meant to be non-figurative. So it was always meant to be abstract, even though Puzzlehead is a little bit figurative. And Stanley Kunis was a local poet, so sometimes he would play he would have a cameo appearance in the cooperative painting project. But I just love this, that they would paint, create these artworks together as a group. Although I've heard that they didn't get along always so well, and so it was a short-lived group. It was only kind of active for a couple of years before they disbanded. And also, yeah, go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's amazing they were able to come up with such a great painting, because, what they say about camels being, a horse by committee. So.
Exactly. I've read a few different things about how their process worked, and one was that they would work on a few things at the same time, and then choose which one they thought was most successful, and then move ahead with that one. And I just love that as a project. And Louis Stone was also inspired by jazz and this improvisational style, and I think you can really get a sense of sort of music and rhythm within his abstract pieces. Yes. And this is just one great example of that. And so Stone was affiliated with the Independents. I don't believe he actually exhibited at Phillips Mill. He certainly didn't exhibit in the first exhibition, but perhaps later on.
Unfortunately, we have to move the pace up a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. If we want to kind of skip around.
We're having a great time. If there's we've got some women coming up, and I'd love to see that. And then before you go, we want to take a peek at what you're working on or what you have up now. So
great. And thank you, Sharon, for your comment about Stanley Kudin, that he was a poet laureate as well. So well-known poet. So they're at the first exhibition. I think 14 women exhibited as well. So it was a nice, just overall kind of sort of a nice encapsulation of, I guess, who was practicing at the time. There were a lot of women artists in the New Hope area and in Philadelphia as well. Some of that was because of the Philadelphia School of Design for Women. That's where a lot of these women got their training and stayed in the area. So these, I'm just showing you a few examples by M. Elizabeth Price, who exhibited in the first exhibition. And these are, of course, her well-known floral screens. Here's another one, this is flower border, and these are all inspired by her garden, where she painted. So these are, excuse me, flowers that she grew in her garden as well. But she's taking, you know, I think we've talked about this a little bit, Laura, about women being seen as decorative painters, and I think Price has worked within that expectation. So still, you know, women artists or painters were expected to paint still lifes, you know, images of children, sort of domestic interiors, that kind of thing. But Price took this still life genre, but made it her own, and really pushed the boundaries of that in a lot of ways by applying this gold, silver, and metal leaf to her work. So it looks like some kind of like Byzantine icon. And that's kind of how she's set herself apart, and made a name for herself. So I think that's interesting. And then the next slide is Coppage, I believe. Yeah, and so Coppage, I think, took like a different route in terms of promoting herself as a painter, and because a lot of press at the time so people who would review Coppage's work and her paintings would write about how she was this rugged, you know, artist that would tromp out in the snow, and, you know, he was excited about harsh winters where she would paint from life. So she kind of, I think, embraced that, this sort of criticism, and not criticism, but promotion of herself as this almost like masculine painter. Actually, I found it interesting the way that she's described in the press is very similar to how Redfield was described in the press as well, as someone who would brave the elements to capture these scenes. And I think that's a way that Coppage set herself apart, right? And I think she was trying to position herself as sort of different than the decorative women painters of the time. And she did that through her snow scenes, which she became most well known for. And here's Back Road to Pipersville from the Michener's collection.
And would you say her reputation from the women has, you know, grown the most, or has burnished the most?
Perhaps. I think Coppage is well known in the Bucks County area, and she's beloved by Michener visitors. I think she's one. Whenever we have social media posts featuring a Coppage work, it always does very well. So it's I think that's a good sign. I don't think Coppage is well known outside of the area, unfortunately. That doesn't mean she won't be one day, or she won't get her due. I'd love to do. I know the Michener had a very early exhibition of Coppage's work back in the 90s, but I'd love to revisit that and do a big retrospective of Coppage again. So it's you know, I think it'll change for sure. But Price is beginning to be well known too, and I feel like I see her work pop up much more at auction and galleries, and I've heard from, you know, museum colleagues that they're interested in her work too. So I think women artists in general in the area are starting to get more attention.
That's great. And Laura, we're going to ask you back to do more with the women, but I want to know, since you say you want to do a Coppage exhibit, it must be a fabulous job to be a curator, and you've got this, I'm assuming, a warehouse somewhere. Do you just go in and say, I think I'd like to show that one, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, we do. We have, we don't have a warehouse. I wish we did, because we could store more of our art. We are a growing collection, and fortunately, you know, every museum needs more space and a bigger vault. But we do, so we have some works in storage, and I like to periodically go down into our vault and look at work and think of what might make sense in our galleries. And we recently did rehang our Impressionist gallery. We also rehung our modernist paintings, and also our contemporary paintings have been rehung recently. So it's always nice to do that. And it's almost like you see old friends that you haven't seen in a while, and some that you might have never seen on view. And we're always adding to the collection too. So sometimes we always especially like to highlight new acquisitions as well within the galleries.
And I know, well, before we go into that, because I know you have recently made some acquisitions, which is really exciting. If you don't mind an indulgence, I'd like to see the Oakley, just because I think it's such a different style for this area. And
yeah, so you go a little farther. And the reason that I included that work, once Jen gets to it,
and we'll get to some of the.
But I included it because these are both paintings, and well, the drawing on the left, of course, and the painting on the right of Ethel Davenport, who also exhibited work in the first Phillips Mill exhibition. But she was a weaver, and I imagine she probably exhibited woven work at Phillips Mill, although it's hard to tell by the titles, of course. And I was looking for work by her, but unfortunately, so she and also Mary Perkins Taylor, who I showed a painting of earlier, were both also textile artists. And Mary Perkins Taylor actually made hooked rugs colored with natural dyes from plants in her garden, but they were just, they just didn't survive really, or we don't have them anymore, which is really sad. And I haven't been able also to find any Davenport textiles too. But Ethel Davenport was the sister of Charles Ramsey. And she was also watercolor, so she could have exhibited watercolors too. But in 1934, she actually offered her studio as a gallery for the Independents. And she was friends with Violet Oakley, which is why we have these really great paintings and drawings of her at work.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I'm very interested in textiles, as some people know. And so, of course, I'm fascinated by the subject matter, but also just in the Weavers of New Hope, this woman, she's so strong and capable. And it's a certain, early 20th century style that I don't associate with this area in particular. So it's great to see that. And she had quite a successful career, didn't she?
Oakley? Yeah, certainly. And this is sort of how she painted a lot of her women's subjects too, as these kind of strong figures. But you really get a sense of that, as you say, in Weavers of New Hope. It's a beautiful painting.
It is. It's lovely. All right, let's take a look at what you have up now, Laura. And while Jen pulls some of that up, I just wonder, Laura, do you come from an artistic family, or are you an artist yourself, or how did you decide to be a curator?
I am not an artist myself, although I actually did study my undergraduate degree is in studio art and art history. I sort of experimented with sculpture, not very successfully. But my family actually runs an auction company, Briggs Auction in Boothwyn, Pennsylvania. And so my great-grandfather started that auction house, and my brother owns it with his wife. Own it now. So I was always surrounded by things, by material culture, by art. Growing up, I worked at the auction at a very young age, and so I was very interested in sort of the history of these things as they would come through the auction's doors and go back out again into a new home. And that really is what inspired me to study art history.
That's exciting. Being a curator is an intensive job because there's so much research and writing and public speaking, in addition to your duties at the Michener. So
it is. But I love it. So it all works out. It's definitely a field you get into because it's what you love. I think anybody in the field will tell you that. But it's a lot of work, but it's good work to do. So
that's great. I'm going to keep you another couple of minutes if you don't mind, Laura.
No problem.
All right, Jen, let's see what is currently at the Michener and some of these new acquisitions. And then maybe while you're pulling that up, I'm going to, Rich Howden has a sort of a series of questions.
I see this, yes. And yes, Tanis, yes. I don't know. I do know a little bit about how Lundfest got that painting, and essentially he really wanted it. I think it was a passion project for him, as I understand it. And he purchased it for the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but with the condition that the Michener can borrow it every few years. So I think Tanis is actually due to return pretty soon to the Michener. But I don't know, and I don't, even if I did know, I don't know if I could share much more of the details. But I know it took a lot of lobbying on Lenfest's behalf to acquire that work.
I'd love to hear you answer I'm assuming that's Phillips Mill and the Phillips Mill relationship with the Michener. I'd love to hear that.
Oh, that's the Philadelphia Museum of Art. That's what he's referring to, right. I think, because Tanis, so Daniel Garber's painting Tanis, which is of his daughter, right. Sort of standing in the large window in his studio, from his studio. It's owned by the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but the Michener and the PMA have a relationship in terms of we can borrow that painting every few years.
Okay. All right. I understand. Thank you. Okay. Let's see there we go. That is your family auction house.
Oh, yeah. Oops, sorry. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I don't want to like plug.
Well,
probably,
you know, I put
I
it
don't
in
want
the
to be
chat.
like I'm plugging the auction, but anyway. Yeah, I see Rich Howard here is talking about why isn't Coppage more well known. I don't know. I think she just needs more scholarship and attention, and hopefully we can get that to her. But I think she should be better known. And Lenfest did have quite a few coppages, many in our collection too at the Michener. So just kind of a quick plug for what's up now at the Michener. We have a really wonderful photography show called Through the Lens, Modern Photography in the Delaware Valley. There's about 100 photographs in this exhibition, mostly from our permanent collection, although we did borrow some works. And there's an example. We borrowed some works from some contemporary photographers of color, including Donald Kemp on the left and added trio on the right. And I'm pleased to share that these two works are now part of our permanent collection. So we acquired these photographs for the Michener. So we have a wonderful photography collection over, spanning several decades. And it's nice to continue to add to it with these two works, for example.
They are fabulous. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to going in and seeing them. I mean, this Do Better is such a great encapsulation of last summer. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And so at a trio, she's done a lot of work too on the U.S.-Mexico border about immigration. She grew up along the border as well, so she has a very deep personal connection to that. But she photographed the Black Lives Matter protests in Philadelphia this past summer, and we were excited to borrow them now, add them to our collection, because we have at the Michener a really great collection of photography of the civil rights movement, of the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s by artists, by photographers Ed Eckstein and Jack Rosen. So it's nice to kind of add work by trio that shows, these protests in a more contemporary moment. It's nice to have that kind of, have that trajectory.
And Donald Kemp, a well-known Philadelphia photographer, this gentleman's face is, there's just so much expression and history in that face. And the whole series, I had a quick look at it.
Yeah, called Dust-Shaped Hearts. So Kemp, really began his career as a newspaper photographer, working in Philadelphia, and he was discouraged by the fact that most of the time Black men would be represented in the newspaper was a mugshot, so they had committed a crime or something like that. And so he began making these portraits to, kind of challenge that really abusive narrative. And so 2008, he went to New Orleans, soon after Hurricane Katrina, and photographed some of the people he met there. And so the man who sews, Colin Lewis, sewed regalia for Mardi Gras parades. So that's what that refers to. And Kemp has a very unique process where he uses cassine and raw earth pigment. And it involves this, it's very complicated to explain, but it involves this like washing away of, for the image to reveal itself. So it's, and you can see, I think, in the kind of the drips down the front of Colin Lewis's face. This print is quite large too. So if you come to the exhibition, it has a really big impact.
It's fabulous. Dr. Laura Turner Igoe, thank you very much for spending some time with us on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. It's been
Thank you. This was fun. I'm so pleased to do this, and I'm glad. I want to thank all the participants too, and your great comments and chats about. I'm just thinking I need to copy the chat so I can document where everything is, and
We can get that code, Laura.
that'd be perfect. That'd be great.
All right, thank you also to Jen McHugh, who put together this show, and she's the executive producer of ArtTalk.
Thanks, Jen.
Of course.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you to our audience for coming. We appreciate it. Next time on ArtTalk, we're looking forward to talking with John Augustine, the judge for Phillips Mill Emerging Playwrights Competition, which has been extraordinarily successful. And we'll have some of those authors talking about their original short plays join us. So ArtTalk, that's May 23rd at 5 p.m. Register at phillipsmill.org. This is Phillips Mill Art Talk, and I'm Laura Womack. Have a good evening, everyone.